Trailer editing is something that you can make it whatever you want it to be. You can invent something that becomes a thing. You can do something that really opens someone's eyes to your ability. One of my favorite memories is going to the movies every Saturday, seeing something new. I remember Back to the Future was like, whoa, this is a thing that I get to enjoy, movies.
The biggest fight in UFC history.
I worked at the UFC for 8 years. It became something more of a different animal at that time. It became something like a trailer. I always having loved movies and realizing that there was a story here. It wasn't just two guys beating each other up. You put the punches and kicks with the rhythm, and you got a promo. Editing promos for the UFC actually became more of a cinematic experience, which was a great lead-in to what I ended up actually doing in editing. Creating your own style and giving back something that wouldn't have existed without you is huge, and it's going to be recognized. So I would say, if you want to be in this industry, edit. If you are a good talent or you can hone your craft, there are people who will want to watch it. So I do blame my parents. They are the ones who took me to the movies every week, probably like a lot of little kids. You know, one of my favorite memories ever is going to the movies every Saturday, seeing something new. I remember Back to the Future was like, I was 6 years old, and it was one of the epiphanies of like, whoa, this is a thing that I get to enjoy, movies, and great storytelling and different characters. And I didn't know what was involved with making them. I would even say I didn't even know that they were made. I just thought they were. They were just movies, and I wanted to be involved in some way. Didn't know as a little kid, but I did know that when my dad brought home that camcorder, the VHS camcorder, that was a window into possibilities. So of course he never saw it again. I used it constantly to create short films as a kid, short videos, music videos, commercials, all sorts of stuff. And it never left my interest. I mean, that was the one thing I knew I loved to do, and I wanted to be involved with it in some way. So that's how it started.
And how did you start working in the industry? Did you go to film school, or what did you study?
I lived in Michigan from 12 to 24, and I went to the University of Michigan for 1 year because I realized you had to be a junior. I don't know if it's still this way, but at the time you had to be a junior to take film classes. And I was like, I don't want to wait. I was taking classes like contemporary dinosaurs and nonsensical classes that didn't really add anything to what I wanted to do. So I left after a year, and I transferred to Full Sail in Florida. That was a 13-month program. I graduated in 1999. And what's funny is, backing up a little bit, I didn't know editing was even really a thing or even a possible career path. Again, like going into not knowing what is involved in making something, truly special. To me, editing kind of just came to be because it was a necessity, because of I wanted to create this project from point A to point B, and you had to get it there somehow. So when I started creating, especially, this is kind of funny, music videos in high school, that was a challenge. Because, I was in high school in 1995. I had no idea what nonlinear editing was. And so I would shoot a music video with a song that existed, Green Day or whatever. And I would edit from literally deck to deck, VHS or VCR to VCR. Now, trying to keep a music video in sync, VCR to VCR, is not an easy task. It was a lot of trial and error. It was, okay, the recording deck has a 6-frame pre-roll. So I need to hit play, and a half a second later, I need to hit record. So it was like, and that happened quite often, where I would go back, and every edit, I was like, oh, that didn't work. My mouth is off. So I had to do it again and again and again until the entire music video was in sync. And that was the way I edited, and that's the way I learned how to edit, which was just a thing I made up. I mean, I'm sure most people did it that way at the time, but this was pre-YouTube, pre-internet. I couldn't just Google how to do something. I figured it out on my own. And there was also, because I'm a very right-brained person, I didn't like writing reports. So in history class, I made a claymation about Henry VIII, and I made an animated video about Rasputin. What happened was, I learned how difficult something like that is, and the challenges that come with it. But the good news is the teachers don't read everyone's reports to the class. But in my case, everyone knew who Henry VIII was, and everyone knew who Rasputin was. Because what I did was I took, for Rasputin in particular, I would draw a backdrop with colored pencils, and then I would use tracing paper for the cells. Again, just kind of winging it. Had no idea how it actually worked. And at the time, my high 8 camera was just you can record a start stop, but it wasn't a frame at a time. It was 6 frames at a time. So what I ended up doing was drawing, and that was a lot of work in itself. And then recording frame by frame or 6 frames at a time, cell by cell, and then I played it back in double speed, so it looked a little smoother. But just the process of then going back, and once you have all those scenes together, and then you cut them all together, and I had a little device that allowed me to add music on top of an already created video. So this was just my way of learning what editing actually was, because no one told me. I took it for granted, and when you watch a movie, you don't realize that multiple takes happen when multiple setups and sequences are at the editor's disposal, but you learn that just trying to do it on your own. So that was how I came to know that editing was an actual thing. And then when I went to film school, and they sat me down in front of an Avid, I was like, what? I can just put this frame anywhere I want? And then they handed me, the holy grail of software on a silver platter. I'm like, okay, I can do a lot more with this. So my interests were heavily writing and editing. And that was something that I kind of just gravitated towards. I didn't realize that was something I was that interested in. I always just thought, probably directing was something I wanted to do, which it still is. But editing just seemed like something that I could do now. And I didn't have to wait. I could edit my own projects. I could edit trailers into other trailers. I can do whatever I want in the comfort of my own home just to get better at it. So that's how editing kind of became a part of my life. I decided to move to LA when I was 24. And coming from Rochester Hills, Michigan, there wasn't a lot of studios out there or anything that would actually be worth, trying to make this career into an actual thing. But I decided to move to LA when I was 24, and it's funny, it just kind of fell into my lap because I did meet some friends in film school, and a few years into waiting tables, one of them reached out to me and said, hey, what are you doing? Reached out to me on MySpace, by the way. That's how long ago it was. He said, I work for the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Well, I knew what it was in a sense, but I wasn't a fan by any means. My brother was a huge fan. He watched UFC 1, but they were looking for a promo editor. So this is actually kind of funny because I had nothing to really show for myself other than a couple of corporate videos, which I had done in the meantime. So I had actually got an interview, and they wanted to see a reel of my work. And I didn't have a reel of my work. I had, like I said, some corporate videos that I wasn't that confident in, like, showing anyone to impress. So I said it was like a Thursday, and I said I'm out of town until next Tuesday, which wasn't true. But what I ended up doing was I did a crash course online of Adobe Premiere and Adobe After Effects, and I put together an edit reel with some of the footage that I had, and I cut it all together in a minute-long piece. And I mean, the rest is history. I got the job.
What was it like when you first, sat down to cut something? How well did your skills hold up at that point?
The great thing about that is it's not a trailer. It's two guys beating each other up, and that's all it is. So you have, let's just say, Fighter A and Fighter B for the entire tenure of your career there, and you have their past highlights. My first promo was UFC 64, and they're well into the 200s now, but at the time they would just hand you a scripted outline, a say, this is what Joe Rogan says, this is what Mike Goldberg says, and this is what you see. The fighter punches this fighter. And it was kind of just a telegraphed way to do it at that point. And so I did it. You were given a selection of music from the music supervisor there. I picked something that was upbeat and fun, and you put the punches and kicks with the rhythm. Boom, boom, bang, bang, boom, and you got a promo. I think it became a little more advanced down the road. I worked at the UFC for 8 years, and it became something more of a different animal at that time. It became something like a trailer. I always having loved movies and realizing that there was a story here. It wasn't just two guys beating each other up. Like when I realized that each guy had a story and a reason for doing what they're doing, it gets a little more complicated. In fact, I became a fan of the sport because I was like, oh, this guy has a family and kids, and this guy is a fresh up and comer and he's trying to prove something. Who's going to win? Like I was actually finding myself, kind of scared for both of them and rooting for both of them at the same time because I was invested in them. So I wanted people to watch these promos and feel that same way, because if you actually invest yourself into the story of someone and why they're doing this, you're going to tune in. So editing editing promos for the UFC actually became more of a cinematic experience, which was a great lead in to what I ended up actually doing.
How much of their stories could you integrate into those promos? Could you tell the story of his family? Could you get new footage that wasn't present when you started cutting?
Yeah, so what we ended up actually doing later on, and I will say, promos exist in different mediums and different lengths of time. In your 30-second promo, you're just going to give the highlights. But if you have a minute and a half to tell a story, you can absolutely get in some of that backstory or some of those emotional bites. But I think about 3 or 4 years into that job, we did start going out and shooting special stories and original shoots like Nike commercials. Like we were a big fan of what Nike was doing at the time, and we thought, well, what if we actually shot something instead of this canned footage that everyone's so kind of used to seeing and so tuned out on a little bit. So when something new and fresh came up, and you actually see this fighter, new and in full color and in brand new footage that you've never seen specifically for this promo, it kind of became like its own event. So we absolutely started doing original shoots as much as we could, and that was a lot of fun. And that was actually how I got into directing as well. So fortunately for me, the UFC, working there was a lot of opportunity. It wasn't a huge animal. I mean, it is, and it was, but it wasn't nearly as big as it is now. And working as the senior promo editor, I had an idea for a shoot. Okay, you can direct it. So that's kind of how it all happened, and that's kind of how I got my footing in that world as well.
What was your favorite project that you worked on during those 8 years?
Oh man, there's a few, but I think my first, which was a fighter named George St. Pierre, who was huge at the time, and a fighter named Jake Shields. They were two huge stars. So to be able to work with them was very nerve-wracking, but I had to kind of rein that in a little bit and act as professional as I could, because I was meeting like someone that I admired for the last 3 years. But the promo was really cool. It used Fort Minor's "Remember the Name." We went backstage with at an event, at an actual fighting event, and we had them cross paths, and like they were like looking at each other, giving each other like the cold shoulder or whatnot. So it was just because that was my first directorial experience. I think that one's always going to stick with me for sure.
Cool. What happened to make you leave UFC?
My love of movies made me leave UFC, because UFC was it was a crash course in editing and style, and the type of editing I do now is all thanks to the UFC. But but I never fully settled there. My heart was always in movies. I always loved movie trailers. I spent 2 years of that 8 years, the last 2 years, trying to get a job in the theatrical marketing world, sending resumes and reels to every industry I possibly could, or sorry, every shop I possibly could, with minimal response until I got one response. But that was weird in itself, because I don't remember applying to this particular shop, and it was the Refinery, and Brett Wynn as well. But Brett Wynn took a chance on me. A lot of the shops that I went after, they said there's promise in what we see, but they just weren't sure how that sports world is going to translate to the theatrical marketing world. So everyone was pretty apprehensive there. But I guess Brett saw it and he gave me an opportunity, and that's how integrated myself into theatrical marketing.
Your first conversation with Brett, like, what did you guys talk about?
It's funny. He invited me down to the office. We sat across from each other. He poured me a glass of whiskey, and we just kind of talked movies and our love of movies. And he actually had done a film called My Date with Drew, which is hilarious because I had been a fan of that movie before I met this guy, and I'm sure it was a good moment for him when I said, I love that movie. And it wasn't BS. It was like, I really did love that movie. It's a documentary about a guy who has $1,100. He went on a game show and he's trying to get a date with Drew Barrymore. And if you haven't seen My Date with Drew, you should. It's a very, very heartwarming, endearing piece of cinema. So we talked about a lot about his work, my work, and our love for the craft.
What was your first project at the Refinery?
So I was a little bit spoiled because the first project I worked on was a movie called The Gallows. It was a horror movie, which they knew I had been a horror fan in the past. But I was spoiled in the sense that I didn't know what to expect with this world and what it took to actually get your work seen by people. And none of that was in my head at the time, which I think was a good thing because I was just I'm happy. I'm editing trailers. This is something I want to do for a long time. And this is a cool movie. Let's cut a trailer together and see how it works. And it actually not only finished, that means that yours won, but it actually won a CLIO. And I was like, there's nothing to this, which is not true. There's a lot to it, which I've come to find out. So The Gallows kind of gave me my first real world experience of editing trailers, but it gave me this false hope of how easy it is to get your work out there.
Can you walk me through what step by step what happened? So on that first project, I imagine you're given a hard drive. Maybe you watched the movie first. How did that whole thing unfold?
I mean, they knew my background. They knew the style that I gravitated towards, and horror driven in a sense, because I just talking to Brett, he knew that I had a passion for horror movies. So this movie came in and they said, do you want to try to cut a trailer for it? And I said, sure. So what happens is you watch the movie, and there's a lot I learned from that moment to 4 trailers down the road. But in that moment, I just watched the movie, picked a piece of music, and started cutting something that I thought would work as a 2.5-minute story. There is a system and a method to it that it's not always natural, but for whatever reason, I had an idea for an opening scene. I had an idea to and track that scene through the rest of the 2.5 minutes. We also settled on a piece of music which was a cover of "Smells Like Teen Spirit" by Nirvana, which was a really haunting and eerie cover, which was very, very cool. And I'm sure music is a driving force in this industry. So that really inspired me to make this thing as creepy as possible. It was a movie about a ghost in a high school, but this one, for some reason, it was really special tone. So it was a lot of fun, and it came together quite nicely. And everyone was happy with it in the end. So in turn, I was like, okay, I think I can do this.
You have all the footage. How is that? Is it the full takes? Is it scenes that are not in the movie? What audio files do you have to work with?
You get the entire movie. I would say more often than not, they give you a feature, and whether that's the finished feature or not, that varies. But you get the full movie, and you can watch it from start to finish. Sometimes in bigger movies, they'll give you the dailies, which is all of the takes before you get a final cut together movie. But in this instance, they give me the full movie. I watched it, and what I was going to say, or what I alluded to, was because this was my first movie, I didn't really know how to approach it. What I learned 3 movies later was the art of the breakdown. And this is a very, very important step when you're going to create a trailer, breaking down a movie. Now, when I was in meetings, producers meetings and editor meetings, when they assign you what to work on, they would always talk about this breakdown, like, make sure you break down the movie, get that movie broken down. And I didn't know what that meant. I went into a fellow editor's bay and I said, what does that mean? I felt kind of foolish asking, what does that mean to break down a movie? And he showed me. And the funny thing about it is every editor has a different method of breaking down a movie. The way he showed me was he would actually go through the entire film and set markers and label the action or label the dialogue or label the shot, what it is. So you have this entire film that's labeled. Like literally every second or two has some sort of label on it. I gave that a shot, but that just wasn't working for me. I was a much more visual guy, and I remember the idea I came up with when I had a very difficult movie. It was Joy, which was a David O. Russell's movie with Jennifer Lawrence. It was a very challenging story. So I started breaking it down with the labels, but I figured there's got to be a way for me to comprehend what this movie's about, what the most important story elements are, story beats, shots. So I started breaking down in a different way, which I'm sure a lot of people do as well. And you create different timelines in your Adobe Premiere or in your Avid, and you create different sequences. I have about 12 of them now, from action, cool shots, establishers, exclamations, looks, um, funny, scary, talkbacks, story. Basically, you watch the movie through and you grab a clip and you place it into a different timeline. So at the end of the day, I have a full story timeline, which is all the story from the movie that you need. Then what I do is go back through that story timeline and I pull out the top of the line, how to make sense of this movie in as few story bites as possible. So I essentially have that bank of story bites, uh, and that's breaking down a movie. And I would say the more meticulous you are during that process, the better the better your chances are going to be, and the more fluid it's going to be when it comes time to actually put something together, because you're going to know where everything is and it's all going to make sense to you at the end of the day. So that's my method of breaking down a movie. Yeah.
And then, if a character says something, how do you determine whether this is going to be important later or versus this is just some character development?
And you don't always know that, and that's why when it's like when in doubt, I put everything in story. If it's just a talkback, which is, talkbacks are those moments in trailers when the action is rising, then a boom explosion or a hit or something, and a stop down, and it's like, well, that was messed up. That's a talkback, and that's not adding anything to the story. But if it's like D24 is going to ruin the world, well, that's a story beat, and you need to know that D24 is going to ruin the world. Now, is that going to be relevant to the trailer? I don't know. I don't know yet. And usually you start with something that's a little more vague, but intriguing. Like you want to start with a line of dialogue that gets you in, but isn't necessarily the meat of the story. You wouldn't start a trailer with D24 is going to ruin the world. You would start with, I remember the day that I ran into D24, or whatever it is. You want to start with who your characters are and who, and what they know about this world that you're going to explain in 2.5 minutes before you get into, boom, this is the problem we're facing. So you do pull more bites into story, or at least I do, than you need. But that's why the process of weeding it out and picking and choosing, which subplots are necessary, if they're necessary at all. But you want to have them, you don't want to not pull them in case they are relevant when you don't realize that. And that's something that's completely new to me, or was new to me. Watching a movie and cutting a trailer for a movie are very different experiences, because you might think you understand what you're trying to sell. But when you actually go to try to sell it, you realize this isn't the route, like the main route isn't the route that I necessarily need to go or want to go, or is the most intriguing aspect of the story. A lot of times it is, but sometimes you have that avenue that's like, what if we just explored this? And watching the movie, you might not realize that this dialogue here is your open. So you pull everything you can, and you trial and error it, and you see what's working and what's not, and with the music you pulled, and then you discard everything you don't need. It takes me about a full day to do a feature. a good 6 to 8 hours to break everything down the way I want to do it. And I would I would recommend putting in that time, because then you don't have to go back to the well. I personally just start cutting, just start putting something on a timeline, just start seeing what works to me, knowing what's not working. I don't like to go to a producer, and certainly not a client, until you have something that you know is working. But when I what I love to do, and this doesn't always happen, but it happens a good deal of the time, is I just kind of just go. I just let it flow, use my first instincts, my gut, what is working, and try to get as complete a cut, if not just an audio bed, but I think people to see the full experience. So when I have an audio bed of music and dialogue that I think is going to be the ultimate trailer, then I'll start stylizing it, adding the visuals, giving it that rhythmic edge, and surprise the producer with, hey, here's a trailer, check it out, what do you think? Sometimes it'll be a lot more difficult than that. There'll be a lot of ways and avenues to take it, and choosing the right one is a lot more difficult than you would think. So sometimes I do give them an option of just a dialogue or an audio bed, and say, here's option one, here's option two, we could use this bite instead of that bite, what do you think? And they'll get back to me and say, yeah, I think you're on the right track. Or sometimes they'll say, I don't know if this open is working or whatnot. And sometimes that happens as well when I present them with an entire trailer. I don't want to make it seem like I present them with gold the first time. I just like to, give them something that they can, experience, and see if they react to it the way that I'm feeling it. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So, they're there for whenever you need them. And that's what's great about this. No one's going to belittle you for not getting it the first time.
Will you start with the music first and then layer in dialogue? Do you start with dialogue? What's your sequence?
I 100% need to start with music. It's probably different for everybody. I mean, you could pull all the bites that you think you're going to use, but for me, well, music has always been a driving force, not just in this career, and not just even at the UFC, which music was huge, but in my life, music has been huge. From high school band or elementary school band to now, music and life have always gone together so well. So I think to know what your tone of the trailer is going to be, you're going to have to know what your music is going to be. So I spend a good couple hours going through all the music polls, and finding something that works. And if it's not there, we go again. And I don't think I'm going to be comfortable getting that story together until I know how this is going to feel, until I know how this trailer is going to make people feel and make people emote. And that's kind of the whole reason we do this. So because music's such an important part of this process, I prefer not to, put pen to paper or put, clips to sequence without knowing what it's going to feel like and what it's going to sound like. So music's usually my first stop. Yeah.
What are music polls, and how do you know what songs you can choose from? What are the limits?
It varies project to project. A lot of times the client will tell you what this should feel like and what the ballpark of music is. They leave it open because they want to see a lot of options. No one wants to handcuff you to a certain song or a certain style. I mean, I could understand wanting to see two completely different styles, something with hip hop and something with the slow, dramatic underscore. A lot of times they leave it open, and then we leave it open to the music supervisor, who will do a general pull based on what the client says, based on what the movie is. Obviously, you don't want to use hip hop for a faith-based movie, unless it works. You never know. But they'll do an initial pull. A lot of times, the editors themselves will have an idea based on the initial direction or what the movie is or movie's about. So I like to talk with the music supervisor and talk options and talk about what the feel of this is and what songs reflect that feel. And is there a possibility to mash up a couple songs? That's always been my thing, but I've gotten in trouble a couple times doing that because I mashed up Frank Sinatra with Led Zeppelin once, and it was very cool, but it was $2 million. And sometimes sometimes your creativity isn't appreciated. It's like, dude, we can't do that. So you have to know your limits. But I just had the idea, and as a creative editor, I wanted to see if it worked, and it worked really well. It was my way with Cashmere, and it was like banana, 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 and now banana, banana. The end is near, banana. It was really cool. Didn't go anywhere.
In Premiere, you were doing that music editing
Yes.
and layering the songs, or did you have the help of audio engineer for that?
So there's a couple things that you can do to make something like that happen. And in this case, you reach out to a library, a music library. There's a lot of music libraries in the industry, a lot of great ones we work with. I mean, there's too many to name. But in that case, we reached out to them and they did an overlay, which was the fusion is going to be of these two songs. Something I should mention is stems. Now, stems I work with a lot is basically you have a song that you want to use, but you don't want the music during this one part. You just want the vocals. So how do you do that? Well, you get the stems. The stems are every element of the song separate. And not it doesn't always exist. Like for the older songs, good luck getting stems. You're not going to get stems for My Way. But you get the vocals, you got the drums, you got the guitar, you got piano, and that allows you to do something with that song that people are not used to hearing, which is a really cool thing I did with, it was a trailer for Resident Evil, the final chapter. We took Guns N' Roses' Paradise City, we got the stems, and there was a moment when it's just his vocals over this fight action, which I was surprised we got for a song, but it worked so well, and the possibilities of mashing up and combining songs and stripping out what's so familiar, but presenting it in a new way is something that we also love to do to make something feel fresh and different and attention grabbing. So stems, mashing up songs, finding the same key of two cues, which fortunately I think My Way and Kashmir were in the same key. So that just blended together so nicely. And what the music library did was they gave me an overlay of drums and I think it was percussion and strings that kind of you laid over both cues, and it just seamlessly blended those two songs together, and they create scores of music. It's it's overwhelming how much music you have to choose from. When you want to use a song like a needle drop in your trailer, which is like, oh, they're using Snoop in this trailer, but we don't want to use the song as it was released. We want to use a trailerized version of this song. So what the trailer house will do, or sorry, what the music library house will do is take that song and make it cinematic and make it feel like it belongs in a movie trailer with adding strings and rises and hits and stop downs and moments that you can actually cut a movie trailer to, instead of trying to just dissect the original song. And it doesn't really go as big and as bold and as epic as it could if it was a trailerized version. So I mean, they're miracle workers for giving us that option for sure.
That's awesome. How often will the songs that you use be from the actual soundtrack, and how often will you use from the film?
I don't believe I've ever even known what the music soundtrack is for the actual film. It's always a brand new cue. You got to be careful with using what they are able to license and what they are able to afford. You don't want to use the Beatles. You don't want to use Michael Jackson unless you have the say-so to use the Beatles and to use Michael Jackson. But I don't typically know what even the soundtrack is. In one instance, I remember I didn't cut the trailer for this, but I was at the Refinery and we were doing the trailer for the movie called Pixels. A great editor, Adrian, cut that trailer, and I remember he used a cinematic remixed version of We Will Rock You. They loved the trailer so much and that song that they ended up putting that song in the movie. So it kind of worked in reverse in that regard. He chose what song was going to be in the movie. And that happens sometimes because it's their movie and it's their marketing, and they recognize how well these two things work together. Why not utilize it the best they can? One of the first questions asked by us and the producers is, what is our music budget? Because we don't want to fall into the Frank Sinatra, Kashmir Zone too many times. So they'll tell you, and obviously the bigger movies, the Warner Brothers movies, they have some money for something that's recognizable, something that's big, something that's going to get them, to invest in that song to get them their return. But if you're doing an indie movie, you're not going to use anything close to that. But like I said, the options of library cues are endless, and sometimes you don't need a big song to sell the movie. You have many tools at your disposal to sell this in the right way.
Okay, so you've done the music bed. You've now selected dialogue and built your story that way. Then what happens?
Well, then what happens is you run it by the producers and see if you have something that works. And usually, if it does, and most of the time, your gut it's not going to lie to you. Like if you are a fan of movies and a fan of movie trailers, you kind of know how the process works. A lot of times, it's just tweaking and finessing and getting it to that sweet spot until you get to your V1, your version one. Your version one is what's going to go to the client. Now, version one isn't the first thing that you cut. Version one is the first thing I cut, but version 1.1, version 1.2, version 1.13, version 1.14, 15, 16 is what we work on internally. And then when that version, V1.22, is perfect, we send the V1 to the client. And then the client has his round of notes, and we get to V2, V3, V4, V5, V6. V6 is perfect. Let's show it to the higher ups. We get to V7, V8, V9, V10. All right, we have one more person we got to show it to. V11, V12, V13. And then I would say half the time it's like, thank you for your efforts. We're going another way. Or you got a lock. And that's what you want to hear. You want to hear that you got a lock. You want to hear that you got the finish. And if you're lucky, you will get that finish. Or, I wouldn't even say if you're lucky. If you are persistent in this, you will get that finish. But it's a subjective industry. The producers in my shop loved V 1.22 as did I. But the client has certain needs they need met. They have certain check boxes they need hit, and it's a kind of a committee at that point. So it's not something to take personally. It's something to continue to work on and understand why, what they choose is what they choose. And that's kind of the process.
That's awesome. And what are the implications for the trailers are not chosen? Are they compensated still some amount?
Yeah. So I think one thing that people are very, very unaware of, and I was unaware of at the time. I mean, I didn't even know this industry really existed, and I don't think a lot of people do. I think a lot of people think that people make a movie and then they make a trailer for their movie. That's couldn't be further from the truth. Every time you sit down at that blank, daunting timeline, you are competing. You are competing essentially in a short film contest. You want to win this 2.5 minute short film contest by turning this movie into a marketable trailer that hits all the buttons, hits all the notes. It's going to vary based on how big the movie is. If you're working on a Universal, Warner Brothers, whatever. I mean, I remember working on the one of my favorite trailers was the Led Zeppelin Frank Sinatra mashup, and it was Kong versus Godzilla. I believe there were about 30 trailers that they were watching. So I was up against 30 different trailers at that point. Then again, you have different size studios that you're up against 2 or 3. And sometimes you're only up against the people in your own shop. So it's going to vary based on how big those studios are and the amount of money they're willing to put towards the marketing. But as far as compensation, shops are always compensated to do the work, and I think that's why we have an industry. You're paid and compensated to do the work that you're paid for to do. I don't think obviously getting the finish is something that can help you get more work and help you gain a relationship with the client. So you always want that, but at the end of the day, you're compensated for the work that you're doing. So everybody wins in a sense.
Of those 30 trailers for Kong, how many came from the Refinery?
Most cases, you would have 3 to 5 editors in your own shop also competing, also doing trailers for the same movie. So, as much as you want to win, and as much as you want your shop to win, which is always going to be a huge victory. Losing to a peer is, you know, losing in general is never great. But I think what's great about having that relationship with your peers is you get to talk to them and you get to congratulate them and you get to see the work as it's being done and you get to ask for their advice or give your own advice and sometimes it's a team effort and sometimes you get to see even if you didn't do the trailer that the trailer that you didn't finish, sometimes you get to see your input on it, or sometimes you get to see their process go from a version 1, which was mediocre, to a version 10, which was freaking brilliant. And you get to understand their process and learn from it and give and take. I mean, it's such a fantastic world to be in, to understand not only your process and develop your process, but to see how other people work. I mean, it's such a beneficial industry in that regard to learn and to grow. So I mean, that's a great thing in having five to 3 to 5 people on the same trailer.
How long does it take to get from that to the first cut that the client sees?
To get to the V1?
Yeah, then what happens?
I would say the average is probably a week.
Wow.
A lot of times they will give you 2. I've never been a fan of of stretching that time out. I want to get it done quickly in case we do have to go back to the drawing board. And a lot of times the V1 that I'm doing has potential, and then we get there within a week. And then we'll send it off, and we'll try to send it off early, especially if we're competing against 5, 6 other shops. We want to get in there first. That could go from anywhere from 2 weeks to I've known editors who have worked on a project for a year and before it got out into the public. I mean, I don't think that's the norm, but it's anywhere in between. And usually in that case, it's more of a stumbling block for the actual production, like it was postponed or whatnot. But on average, getting your work from a V1 to a finish would probably take a couple months.
Okay. You mentioned stems for music. Do you get stems for the film as well? So if you want some dialogue without the music?
So we get split audio for every feature we do, which is huge. Yeah, you'll get the dialogue, the music, and the sound effects all separate, which is a huge tool.
Awesome. Motion graphics, animation. Do you work with?
Yeah, a lot of times we'll have an idea of what we want, and we'll do a temp graphics, temp motion graphics, depending on how invested you are in this actual style. Like, I mean, if you have an idea that incorporates shots from the film like blending into each other and splitting apart or whatnot, you're going to do that at temp enough so that the motion graphics department can see the idea that you're going for, and then they'll do it professionally and make it look amazing. But sometimes you just put copy cards in there. It says it's just a plain white on black copy, and then they'll make it look amazing. But I think it depends on how invested you want to be in it, and you can do as much or as little as you want in that regard.
Cool. What was your journey up the ladder, and how do you ascend?
It's a little different for me because I had this background in UFC editing. I know a lot of people who start as an intern and then as a runner and then as an assistant, and I think that's a very valid way to do it. In fact, to be completely honest, I kind of wish I had done that myself. Like when I was in my teens, I didn't know that was an option. I didn't investigate, but I think that's a very valuable way in and a very knowledgeable way in, because you get to see the work happening before you have to actually tackle it yourself. For me, I had this editing job at the UFC, and I would create reels based on that work to try to get into the trailer industry. And like I said, Brett Wynn gave me an opportunity, and I just kind of hit the ground running and worked my way up from there. Now, where that took me was something that I didn't expect. I mean, I ended up doing a trailer for a movie called Better Watch Out, which was an Australian horror Christmas comedy. And they were having a lot of problems marketing this film because there's a twist that happens about 20 minutes in. So how do you market a film without spoiling this very important twist? It took some time, but ultimately we cracked it. And what happened was the producer of that film, his name is Brett, he said, "Hey, really appreciate what you did. We're always looking for work. Do you have any scripts? Are you a writer?" And I said yes. So I actually had a script that I had written, And that happened. That was not my intention going into the industry, but I actually got to make a feature based on my work as an editor. So for me, the latter was ultimate fighting to trailer editing to making a feature.
And so, how often will editors transition into being a producer? Is that a hybrid role where they'll keep cutting, but now suddenly they're overseeing entire teams? Or help me understand what a producer is. And
Yeah, those are called predators, producer editors, and there's some in my shop right now that will bring in work, and they will assign a trailer to me while they also do a cut on it, which is kind of daunting to be honest, because you have the producer who knows the client and knows what the client wants, and they're going to be cutting their own trailer, and then they're going to say, "Why don't you cut a separate trailer?" But it's never a hostile environment. I mean, they're always open to giving you the best advice they possibly can. But yeah, it's definitely something that you can absolutely take on. You can be that predator role if you want. If you want to bring in that work and if you want to have your own client, it's not a far leap. And I've known plenty of people to do it. So yeah,
what shop are you at now?
I'm at a shop called Project X AV.
And what brought you there? What do you like about that
So what
environment?
happened was, and I'll go back a little bit from the refinery. Uh, we had the opportunity. Me and a producer at the refinery had an opportunity to make this movie. Because of that, he had opened his own shop, and I left to go work at the shop so that we can get the movie made and so that we can do post on the movie. Not long after the movie was released, that shop kind of went away, and I had to, look for somewhere else to go. And Project X had been a shop that I had actually not heard a lot about, but I did my wide cast on LinkedIn of possibilities, and I did a number of interviews, and it was just the one that felt right to me. It was at the time it was close to home, and the work they did I thought was very cool and respectable, and I hit it off with the president, and we just kind of made it a thing, and I've been happy there for the last 2.5 years. So, knock on wood, that's where I'm at for now.
Awesome. What are the trailers you're most proud of that you've cut throughout your career?
One of my favorite trailers is something that didn't even finish, and I have it. I don't think I'm allowed to say this, but I have it on my phone, and I reference it constantly because it's the edit was just something that I didn't get to do often. It was a movie called Mandy, starring Nick Cage, and it was one of my favorite pieces I've ever done, and it had a lot of technicality in the edit. So I go back to that well constantly to see how I executed that, and I use what I learned from that edit quite often. That said, out there in the world, one of my favorite pieces is the Kong Skull Island piece, which uses the animals cue, "We got to get out of this place." That's a very fun trailer. That was a extremely fun piece to work on. It was such a cool movie, and it was so well shot and so well directed that they essentially give you all of the goods you need. And it's kind of cheating because when they give you that great of work, I don't want to say you don't have to put work into it. You do, but you don't have to try that hard to make it look cool. That said, the choice of song plus the edit plus the visuals, it just came together so nicely, and that's absolutely one of my favorite pieces. Along with the Red Band trailer for a movie called Don't Breathe, which is a horror movie, which we were told to just be weird. We have our trailer one, which is the story trailer. Be weird for this next trailer. So my schedule back then, pre-wife, pre-kids, was stay up as late as you got to stay up to make this as crazy as you got to make it. And I actually came to the office like at 2 a.m. for a few nights in a row, because that's when my mind is just bonkers. And what we ended up with was this very strange red band. Can you swear on this podcast or
Yeah,
no?
yeah.
So it's called Fucked Up, and throughout the piece you have the character saying really fucked up, really effed up. And a tidbit, a side bit is ADR, which we didn't talk about at all. But if you watch that trailer, that's not the character saying that at all. That's me. So
Wow.
I got to actually say, really fucked up, fucked up, fucked messed up. And I just repeated that because he doesn't actually say that in the movie, but he has a scene where he's talking to his dad and he said, I really messed up. And we thought it would be fun to just go with that, run with that, and make it a red band effed up trailer where every time he said it, you saw something effed up. He said it again, and it got even more and more effed up as the trailer progressed. Didn't make a lot of sense story wise, but the visuals and the narrative of like, I'm going to see something really messed up was kind of what that trailer was about. The studio loved it, and it's definitely one of my favorites that I've done.
Awesome. I love that trailer, and I love Skull Island is just amazing.
Oh, thank you. That's another example of something that they give you everything you need on a silver platter. I mean, that movie was so well shot and so well done. And also, the Batman trailer was awesome to work with. I mean, you have a embarrassment of riches trying to figure out what to use and what not to use. And this was like, I think over a weekend where I had to just kind of knock something together. Unfortunately, it worked, but they had that amazing car chase, which is what I wanted to focus on in the beginning of the piece. And you can't make that car chase look bad. So that piece opens with, half of it is the car chase, and then you get into the Riddler and the Batman. And that was a lot of fun to work on for sure.
So what is it that makes a great trailer? And how did you evolve as a trailer cutter over the years?
A great trailer, it can be so many different things. And I think going back to something I said earlier is whatever makes your audience emote in some way. You don't, the last thing you want is for someone to watch a trailer and then forget about it. You want them to remember something about it. And that one thing could be one moment. It can be the music you choose. It can be the way you cut the footage with the music. I myself am more of a rhythmic editor, and I think that's something that's never going to go stale, because music's never going to go stale. People love a good beat, love a good rhythm, and it's something that makes them feel something. In the case of music and rhythm, I mean, that's just like, that was cool. Like if you see a trailer and you don't even really remember the movie, but you remember that trailer was cool. That whatever they did with that was really cool, and I remember it. So in my case, I like to do the rhythmic style of editing that you choose a piece of music that is trailerized and has those elements that give you the opportunity to include those stop down moments, the best parts of the trailer, and then picking it right back up with some bing bang boom style of editing that just makes you go jaw to the floor. I don't know what I just saw, but I know that I like it. So in my case, I like that style, but I've seen trailers my favorite trailer is for a movie that didn't even do well. It was that Battle Los Angeles trailer. And that's just one piece of music that rises, and it's like a vocoder. It's like not even a big epic score. It's a soft piece of music that builds with a rise over action that just grows and grows and grows and grows. I mean, if you haven't seen it, check out Battle Los Angeles trailer. That came out before I was even in the industry, and I remember how cool that was and how badly it made me want to see that movie. And I think that's what's cool about it. There's no rules in this industry. You can invent something that becomes a thing. You can invent a style that you see other people use. I mean, I can't say for certain, but I know that when that Don't Breathe trailer came out, I saw a couple of trailers come out after that I feel like, saw my trailer. And it's a great feeling. It's like you added to this industry. You added to this field. You added to people's experiences in some way. There are trailers that I will still watch from many, many years ago before I ever did this that have affected me in some way. I mean, I think if you ask a lot of people, whether they say it facetiously or not, a lot of their favorite part of going to the movies is the trailer. And you could be part of that. Like you can invent something that makes people's day. You can do that you can do something that makes people's excitement for this industry and the love of this movie be something that it wouldn't have been without your hand in it, your touch on it. And like I said, there's no rules. If you're an action guy, you can be the most extreme action guy you can be and take it to levels that we've never seen before. Or if you like soft, eerie stuff, I mean, that you can even incorporate the two. Like there's no limit to what your imagination can do to someone else's work. You can take someone else's movie and make it something completely different. As long as they're okay with that, you can actually sell their movie in a way that it was never intended. So I just think the opportunity for using your own creativity to put an impact on this industry is a selling point right there.
That's awesome. Can you share any numbers of the range that a very high level trailer editor can earn versus someone just starting out?
Yeah, I mean, without giving too specific of an answer, I think if you can rise to the top of this industry, you're going to have it made in the shade. I know. I mean, there are big names in the trailer industry that make well over what some of the clients do. That's not me, but they are out there, and they have a name for themselves, and they have a business for themselves. And one of the top horror editors in the industry, I've heard stories of what what people like that make. As far as coming in, I think it's a very, very fair scale. I think for what you need to learn to really hone your craft, you're getting compensated quite well, and it's going to be up to you how far you take that, and how you grow, and how much you're worth. You again, creating your own style and giving back something that wouldn't have existed without you is huge, and it's going to be recognized, and you're going to be able to take that and make your own way and make your own style, and you're going to be rewarded for that, whether it's compensation or recognition or just feeling good about choosing the right path for yourself. I think you get compensated in many ways in this industry. So really, it's up to you, and it's how much you want to put into it. But if you decide you want to put into it all that you can, I mean, the sky is the absolute limit. You can take this anywhere you want to go. You can be a filmmaker. You can be on the client side. You can make quite a hefty living. So it's going to be up to you.
Cool. For someone who dreams of having a career like yours, what advice do you have for them? How can they get started? How can they position themselves?
Yeah, this is easy. Edit, because if you have a computer and you have $20 a month, you can buy Adobe Premiere. You don't need to go out and shoot original content, and you certainly can. But before I did this as a job, I did trailer remixes just for fun, which was taking a movie and remixing it into a different genre. The one I saw that inspired me to do this was a trailer called Shining, and someone took the movie The Shining and made it into a feel-good family drama. I think it's still on YouTube. It's absolutely classic. It's so hilarious. And so I did my own. I took Goodfellas and I made it into a psychological thriller. It's called Karen. That's on YouTube. And I did Big. I took Tom Hanks completely out of Big, and I made a movie trailer called Macmillan Toys, and it was about the little kid trying to make his way through this fun toy and creator job. And I did Three Amigos, and I made a kind of like a serious Western out of it. I've known people to get internships or even assistant editor jobs because they took a trailer, an old trailer, and modernized it and made it something that you would actually see today. I just recently, a buddy of mine hired an intern because they did something with a Top Gun trailer and mashed it up with, I think it was like the Wakanda Forever trailer. You can do whatever you need to do in the comfort of your own home. As long as you're editing, you can do something that really opens someone's eyes to your ability, and you don't need any money or guidance to do it. You can just do it on your own. So I would say, if you want to be in this industry, edit. And you can find many, many resources. There's so many tutorials online on YouTube. There's a lot of software that you can learn. There's a lot of references that you can also watch. And I would just say, watch trailers. See what's working and see why these trailers, now that you know that every trailer you're watching beat out at least one other trailer, sometimes 30 other trailers, know why that one won. I mean, if you watch a trailer for a big Warner Brothers movie, that beat out a lot of trailers. So study it. Why did that win? The choices, the music choices, the edit choices, the dialogue choices. Especially if you've seen that movie. And I would recommend watching the trailer to a movie that you've already seen. And I did that recently. I watched the movie called The Menu. I had no idea what this movie was. So it totally blew my mind. We'll go into that later. But I hadn't seen the trailer, and I watched the trailer when I got home. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And that's someone who's in this industry, like what I have done. I don't know if that it would have been far off than what finished, but realizing what existed and what they used is a huge help. So study trailers, edit, do whatever you can and look, social media is huge. You can send whatever you do to anyone you want. Get on LinkedIn, see who's in the industry, see who's in the marketing field. Send them stuff. People will watch it. People want to hire good talent. People want good talent in their shops. So if you are a good talent or you can hone your craft, there are people who will want to watch it.
Great conversation. We'll come back soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nick, and congrats on this podcast. It's great. I really appreciate giving editors a voice.
Thank you.
Thank you.